podcast from Convergence Magazine. I'm your host and the publisher of Convergence, Cayden. On this show, we're building a roadmap for the movement that's working to block the impacts of rising authoritarianism while building the strength and resilience of the broad front that we need to win. This week on the show, we are sharing the recording of a plenary panel that I presented on at MediaJustice and Mijente's Take Back Tech 3. Moderated by Tech Policy Press's Justin Hendrix, I'm also joined by Andre Brock, who's an associate professor at Georgia Tech who teaches about Black digital media, and Ariella Steinhorn, an independent tech journalist who's worked with whistleblowers across the tech industry to talk about big tech and narrative power. We look at the ways that big tech has sold us a vision of the future and the ways that our communities are in the midst of creating an alternative future, one act of resistance at a time. But first, these headlines. It's SCOTUS decision season. Honestly, it's often really hard to figure out what to share with listeners about what's happening with SCOTUS in June because every year it feels like an escalating cascade of cringe. One of the big decisions from last week cleared the way for the Trump administration to end temporary protected status for refugees from Syria and Haiti in particular. The order takes effect in a month, meaning hundreds of thousands of Syrians and Haitians who've been living and working in the U.S. for years are at risk of detention and deportation. It also opens the door to removing TPS from the estimated 1.3 million immigrants who have legal status under their program by curtailing the ability of TPS holders to challenge the government over violations of the law that created TPS in the first place. Immigrant and refugee legal aid organizations are calling this the largest potential de-documentation in U.S. history. Meanwhile, the court did also hand down a surprising win this week, upholding Mississippi's mail-in ballot rules. Mail-in ballots are, of course, a key tool to ensure accessibility at the polls. This court isn't usually keen on defending voting rights, so this was a bit of a surprise. Moving on to a criminal court case, the so-called Antifa cell terrorists in the Prairieland, Texas case were sentenced last week. While it isn't surprising that the protester who's responsible for firing a weapon and injuring a police officer on the scene received a 100-year sentence, the fact that anyone else was even convicted and sentenced at all is beyond absurd. Even a couple who were accused of simply moving some political zines received a 30-year prison sentence, based in part on the fact that they also owned a printing press and had flyers for a reading group named after anarchist thinker Emma Goldman, who, by the way, was also prosecuted and convicted for publishing pamphlets protesting the First World War and encouraging draft resistance. The Justice Department repeatedly uses the word terrorist to imply a greater threat than exists in this situation, but it's important to remember that this is a test case to see how heavily they could bring the court system down on dissent of any kind. Trump's FBI continues to float test balloons to prosecute activists and organizers for their political beliefs. For evidence of this, we need only point back to last week's episode when we covered the FBI sweep of the Ohio Organizing Collaborative to connect these dots. Whoever replaces Trump after 2028 has got to be prepared to pardon all of the nonviolent offenders in this and other protest-related cases as a day-one action to signal to the country that this kind of authoritarian crackdown on free speech will simply not be tolerated. Last week, 3 New York-based Democratic Socialists, backed by Zohran Mamdani and DSA, swept their respective congressional primary races. These 3 candidates, based in New York, Claire Valdez, Brad Lander, and Darya Avila Chevalier, beat out more centrist Democrats in a show of Mamdani's political influence and the rising popularity of democratic socialism. Some more moderate Democrats in Congress have already denounced the victories, putting out a joint statement that states that we are capitalist, not socialist. Honestly, embarrassing. Finally, it might come as no surprise to hear that the deal between Iran and the U.S. to bring hostilities to a close is already kind of breaking down. When the deal was announced, observers noted that, and stop me if you heard this one before, it seemed that negotiators for each side had very different reads on what the deal actually entailed. Meanwhile, it's unclear whether or not a parallel agreement between Israel and Lebanon has a future, in spite of the fact that it was signed late last week. Over the weekend, Israel resumed missile strikes in southern Lebanon and refused to pull back their forces until Hezbollah agrees to complete disarmament, which doesn't look like it's happening. Before we jump in, I want to let you know that it's summer membership drive time here at Convergence. It takes a lot of people power to put this show out week after week, and if what we do matters to you, consider becoming a member. You can go to bit.ly/2026 member drive, all one word, and sign up. We're looking for 250 people to join us this summer, which will double the number of folks in our membership program. This year, we're rolling out new perks for members, including hands-on training sessions based on Convergence articles, opportunities to connect with staff and contributors, and other events to build community with like-minded organizers from across the country. And as a special thank you for folks who join us this drive, we've got an exclusive limited edition t-shirt from Bread and Water Print Shop. You can check out the design at bit.ly/2026 member drive. I think it's pretty rad, and I'm excited to see it at meetings, protests, and parties near me soon. Head over to bit.ly/2026 member drive and set up your membership today. That's bit.ly/2026 member drive. Back in April, our friends at MediaJustice and Mijente hosted their third Take Back Tech convening in Atlanta, Georgia. The MediaJustice team invited me to speak on a plenary discussing the narrative terrain on which movements are struggling against the tech oligarchy, which, as listeners of this podcast know, I think about quite a lot. The conference was really inspiring. I got to meet organizers from all over the country and really around the world working on fighting techno-fascists and imagining a more just and democratic world for everyone. The main stage discussion that I had with my co-panelists Andre Brock and Ariella Steinhorn span a range of issues, from corporate media consolidation to big tech product design, industry whistleblowing to liberating ourselves in real time. The panel was moderated by the founder and CEO of Tech Policy Press and guest of last week's Attention Economy Navigator, Justin Hendrix, whom you'll hear speak first to introduce the panel. Take a listen.
I'm just so excited to be here and to be with this panel. And I think you're all probably wandering away with some scrap of an idea or a quote or something someone said that's going to stick with you. There have been so many things like that for me this weekend. And as we kind of go into this conversation, which I think is meant to open us up towards thinking towards the future, I just want to reflect on a couple of those things that I've heard. I remember yesterday, Dr. Sophia Noble talking about tech as a political process. That really stood with me. Somebody in a session that I was in, I think they were talking about data center development, and they uttered the phrase, "What is being built reminds us of what is not being built." And I thought that was particularly power. I heard a Georgia activist say, "Why don't we go on the offensive?" I heard Stephen at the opening talking about who is this for? Keyshawn Pearson asking about how we shift this future to something human, something real. I heard someone else say, when empires fall, paths to radically different futures open up. And I heard someone say, cities are points of friction to slow the spread of the surveillance state. I've heard so many things like that this weekend that felt like they were oriented towards the future, oriented towards trying to open our imaginations towards what's possible. So we're going to have this panel discussion today. I hope we'll spend a bit of time, of course, framing the challenge as we've been doing all weekend, but also opening it up towards how do we move towards that future? How do we move in that direction? So I might invite my panelists before we dive into the meat of this. Is there something that you're taking out of this weekend, something someone said that you want to call out from the stage before we get into the meat of the conversation? And maybe, Cayden, can I start with you? Actually, put you on the spot?
So one of the things that's been amazing about this weekend is I feel like it's been kind of a reunion weekend for those of us who are really formed by the Allied Media Conference in Detroit, Michigan. Yeah. But I think one of the things that's amazing about this reunion feeling that a lot of us have had, and I was talking about this with, I actually had this conversation with a couple of people in this reunion class, is that like, if this conference was just a reunion, I don't think it would have this energy, and I would be worried about the health of our movements. But the fact that, like, I would say that the reunion folks are about 25% of who's here, and there's a lot of young people here, and there's a lot of people who have come into movement through very different pathways, not just through this sort of, like, radical media space, is a sign to me that we are ready to win. It is a really good sign of the health of our movements, and I could not be more excited about it.
I would just say the really like palpable joy, and even in the face of all of these really difficult issues that we're tackling, I think that there is an optimism and a joy and a desire to of course call out what's wrong, but also to build and to change and to come together. And sometimes I feel like, you know, covering the news these days, it's a lot of doom and gloom. It's depressing, but it's been a really like joyful, I guess, experience being here.
So I don't do mornings. So much of this day and the last couple of days have passed in a blur. What I will say as a nerd academic is that I talk a lot about social movements online, have been talking about them since Ferguson. And one of the things I've always said, because I've been told that you can't use social media to start any kind of credible social movement. And I always say that without the foolishness and the care and the concern and the catharsis that people demonstrate in social media communities, you never get to activism. You have to build community first. And so I've been really pleased and excited to see the community that's being built here, the services and stuff that Stephen and his crew have offered in support of y'all to come here and make this thing happen. So thank you for having me. This has been fantastic.
Okay, we're going to jump a little bit into maybe the darker element of this conversation, the part about technology capture and oligarchy. I think the first question we want to kind of get into is a little bit your sort of diagnosis, how the capture happened. And I think that's important. We've heard multiple diagnoses from the stage, from Naomi Klein on through yesterday's afternoon's excellent and heated debate. But I think it's important just for us in this conversation to come back how you define how the capture happened. And so, Andre, I'll come to you first. You've written so compellingly about platform ownership, about the aspects of racial power that come into play here. Your book is a kind of defining, tome in critical internet studies. How do you put it? How do you sum it up in an elevator pitch? How did the capture happen?
There's a phrase I like to use called technoculture. And technoculture is simply how technology informs politics, culture, and society. And so I've been getting asked more and more about technofascism and platform control over our lives. And I always push back and say, this is just the latest instance of how colonialism and commerce have structured the new world since Portugal brought enslaved people over to the Canary Islands in the 1500s, right? And so the extraction of bodies from their own identities and then the monetarization of those identities, whether it's accounting records that the slaveholders sent back to their homelands so that they could get financialized, or whether the platforms are extracting them and selling us to data brokers, it's a long, unbroken stream of platforms broadly defined, using information about us to control the bodies and the world that we live in.
Ariella, let's go with you. PR, narrative machinery. How does all of that come together to create the kind of capture we're talking about today?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like, also touching on your earlier question, a lot of these like billionaire megalomaniacs, they don't like criticism, but they know the power of narrative. So they want to capture the narrative for themselves because they're afraid, I think, actually, at the end of the day, of voice. And the PR teams, they essentially just want to discredit the truth. And I think that people who, in tandem with legal teams, the PR teams will say that workers are disgruntled when really they're just telling the truth about working conditions. They'll say that whistleblowers were poor performers. They'll have all kinds of excuses for why the truth is not real, though it is. So I think that they scare a lot of people. But I think that they ultimately are the ones who are scared of voices, and that's why they're so desperate to control the channels, whether it's Elon Musk and Twitter, Larry Ellison, as Stephen mentioned, Jeff Bezos and the Washington Post. I mean, like, these are egotistical maniacs who don't want, they don't want to be criticized. So they're going to do whatever they can to clamp down, to not let the truth get out. But it finds a way.
So Ariella brought up consolidation, media consolidation. Cayden, to you on that point. How did that consolidation happen? What's it look like right now? What's your diagnosis for how this control occurred?
Well, for me, a lot of the question about consolidation does come down to questions about design, right? I am also a product design person. I don't like the word multi-hyphenate. I just have ADHD. But when I think about consolidation, again, to harken back to what Dr. Noble was talking about yesterday about technology as a political process, not just as a tool, like there are design decisions that are taking place at every level of technology and media, right? And like, I think one of the things, again, that comes out of the conversation from the Allied Media Conference, and I'm just going to shout out Yuna Lee, who I don't know where she is in this room. I'm sure she's in here somewhere. There she is. And the design justice principles that came out of a lot of conversations at the Allied Media Conference, that there are other ways of doing design than this sort of like top-down capitalist-driven design. When I was in graduate school, I dropped out of graduate school. I couldn't. Yeah, dropping out of school. One of the things that we learned about was this idea of the habitus of technology. What is it that technology is trying to get us to do? And there are a lot of ways in which the design of the tools that we use nudge us, or in some cases, shove us really hard towards a way of being both as humans who relate to that technology, but then also nudge us towards how we relate to one another, right? And like having a critical analysis of that habitus is really important because on the one hand, there's a designed and an intended habitus of every piece of technology that we use, but then also with every piece of technology, there is also a sort of like insurgent or fugitive way of using that technology. And I think, to this question of consolidation, I think that a lot of the habitus that's been pushed on us is about creating a sort of like, frankly, fascistic monoculture that is about sort of like numbing us out, locking us down, and alienating us from the products of our leisure, not just our labor. And one of the things that I also think about these design decisions is the thing that came to mind was Facebook Basics. Do people remember this? Facebook Free Basics. It still exists. So it's a collaboration between Meta. This was launched in the 2010s between Meta and a lot of governments in the developing world. And the idea was they were going to give free internet to everybody in the developing world. But one of the things that researchers found was that I think this report came out in 2015, was that in a number of countries that had rolled out Facebook Free Basics, something like 60% of internet users thought that Facebook.com was coextensive with the internet. And that is compared to 5% here in the United States, where we have a relatively free and open internet. This was always about market capture, right? It was not about like Facebook giving away the internet out of the goodness of their hearts. This kind of collaboration between the state and big tech has always been a feature of the sort of like design environment they're trying to enclose us into.
So I want to talk a little bit about the impact of all this on communities. And I also want to challenge my panel from this point. Feel free to engage with each other, pick up on each other's points, respond to one another. We can make this, a conversation, not just me, of course, pinging questions at you. But maybe, Andre, I'll come to you because just before we were talking about, you teach just down the street. You have observed this community, this area for a long time. You've seen the changes right here in Atlanta. When you think about the cost to communities of the current tech oligarchy, the current circumstances that we're in, I don't know, what do you look at these days lately? What rises to the fore for you? What phenomena seem like they're most prominent?
This is an interesting question because there are two ways I could answer it. I could take a look at what's being done to us and what's being done by us. And my preference is always to look at what's being done by us. So, and not bias, but by us, right? I'm trying. I swear it's early. I'm working on it. And so Cayden brings up a point about fugitivity, and I've written for years about Black Twitter, and I'm now looking at other spaces where Black people are online. And so we have always had to exist as people of color, as disabled people, as queer folk in the corners and the intersections of any structure that we've been forced to inhabit or ended up inhabiting. There's a difference to me between where you stay and where you live, right? And so in that particular case, many of us choose to stay online in spaces that are run by people that we normally wouldn't fuck with in public. Is that fair? Right. And so Elon Musk took over Twitter, Larry Ellison with TikTok, Donald Trump with the United States. Right. And so despite that, though, we continue to find ways to laugh, love, and live with one another, right? And so, to me, it's much more important to me to talk about Black life than it is to talk about Black negation, and I hope that falls true for many more of you as well. And so, let's keep the conversation going around what people do to build one another up, whether it's hashtags like You OK Sis, or Me Too, or Black Lives Matter, or other ways in which we show up for one another in these different spaces.
And can I just push you a little bit right here in Atlanta? Like, what are you seeing right here in the neighborhood?
You assume that the mic was the problem and not my mic technique. I appreciate that. I have to be honest and say, maybe this is not unfamiliar to you. I have been slowly recovering from what the pandemic did to me in terms of my social isolation, my grief, the desire of my employers that we return to normal. And so I don't have as much of an eye on Atlanta as I probably should. What I am aware of as a gentrifier, because we can do that too, is watching the neighborhoods that I now live in, which were formerly the place where Gucci Man used to sling his raps in Old Fourth Ward, right, or Southwest Atlanta, watching these spaces get slowly taken over. And as they're being taken over by the forces of commercialism and capitalism, those communities are not also receiving the benefits of the internet society that we are supposedly been told that we deserve thanks to the Telecommunications Act of 1996. I'm a nerd. I know. I'm sorry. Right. And so it's a divergent perspective, right? You watch how the neighborhood goes from pit bulls to labradoodles, right? And yet our bodies are not able to exist in those neighborhoods in ways that I would consider abolition, with the very, very low-level definition of abolition, whereas I get to fail in the most graceful way possible, just like I see other people doing so as well. And so I don't have the best answer for this. I will say that I try to keep a keen eye as a sociologist on these things.
I will say labradoodles can be vicious. Ariella, do you want to pick up on anything Andre said there?
I agree in like the reclamation of digital spaces and, and being on the internet and being vocal as a woman journalist, it can be, you get a lot of harassment and a lot of deterrence and a lot of people wanting you to be quiet. But I think there are spaces that can be more regenerative and so, yeah, I agree that we can't just opt out necessarily, because our voices need to be there too. And so I totally agree with that point.
Cayden, I'll come to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that when I was thinking about what I was going to say this morning, I was like, what haven't I heard from the big stage that I really want somebody to insert a thought about? And one of those things is the attention economy, right? Yeah. Shout out to people who are thinking about the colonization of our attention. Because I think that, there is a way in which, and this is speaking purely from my experience as somebody who ran a digital first organizing outfit for about 10 years. I know there's some folks from 18 Million Rising here. And the experience that we had trying to build Asian American, like explicitly leftist Asian American community on the internet was, I think, a very instructive one, in the sense that like a lot of Asian Americans, when we got started in like 2011, 2012, had kind of forgotten why the term Asian American existed in the first place, right? Which is explicitly in response to the sort of like 1960s, 1970s Third World Liberation Front, and was like about creating a majoritarian idea of what we could do together in solidarity with other peoples of color here in the United States and around the world. But one of the things that I've been reflecting on lately is that the social platforms that we are building community on, the goal of those platforms is to keep us on those platforms. to capture and colonize our attention and to make money from them, not in the sense of if the platform is free, you are the product, but literally in that the way that Shoshana Zuboff talks about in The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, that our work and our leisure is explicitly the raw materials of a new kind of capitalism, right? And like that is the nature of the like regime of surveillance that we live under. And so I've been thinking a lot about the attention economy, which is not a new term. It actually goes back to the sort of like Cold War cybernetics. All of a sudden there's a glut of information and we don't know what to do about it. This predates social media in a really important way. And so to think a little bit about the design choices about how we get sort of like stuck on social media, that like a lot of this is not our fault, y'all. Like I think that the study of the design of technology is important for that reason, right? It's to remind us that like we are engaging in practices online to find one another because that's what we've always done, as Andre is saying. And also, once we're on them, it's really hard to get off, and that's by design. Yeah, I guess I'll leave it there.
Andre?
I love, here I am, once again, duality. I love and hate the phrase attention economy, because attention economy implies that the reason why we're online is so that we can end up being commodified. And again, I turn back and say, we're online in many ways to distract ourselves from the crap that we're dealing with on an everyday basis, whether it's waiting on public transportation or waiting on hold or waiting to get paid, right? And so those things trouble me, right? Because I think about the intimacy of having a device in your hand that we were told would connect us to all the world's knowledge, and how we wanted to be those knowledgeable people, right? The first phrase that started coming up with any regularity for me in the early 2000s was Google it, right? Matter of fact, I would tell people, and Sophia's sitting in the audience with me, we would tell people we are internet researchers, and people would snicker and be like, I got Google, I'm an internet researcher too. Like, shut up. And so, yes, it is an attention economy. Yes, there are dark patterns built into your phone and to your browser and into many other devices you use that are designed to capture and keep you on a page in order to mine information about you, your habits, your spend, your desires, right? And yet, and still, we still manage to find ways to try to work around those things. Some of us are smarter than others. Some of us use VPNs, hint. Some of us use ad blockers, hint, hint, right? And some of us actually go into the settings of our various browsers and smartphones, or let me start with smartphones. Turn off, you know security protocols, turn off location on your photos, right? There are many ways for us to work around it without necessarily denying yourselves the capacity to reach out and touch one another. One of the greatest threats for older people is when they fall out of conversation, out of sociality, because their peers have passed, their children have moved, and it turns out that Facebook and other social media groups are crucial for keeping them connected with people that they love. So I'm not saying you're not being mined, but understand that there are steps you can take in order to push back against that mining and preserve your sociality.
So let me ask you in particular about how that perspective has changed or shifted or grown for you with regard to AI. How are you thinking about artificial intelligence tools? But how does your kind of framework or rubric for thinking about these things shift when it comes to AI?
So I'm actually going to hand this off to Ariella if she doesn't mind, because to me, AI is currently one of the greatest PR campaigns that I've seen in the last 15 years. So is there something you could add to this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the people, the oligarchs who are creating AI would have you believe that it's totally inevitable. And it's not, but they, the narrative that this is what's coming, you need to get on board or get left behind, which was literally something that Reese Witherspoon said the other day, which is embarrassing.
The second time Reese Witherspoon's come up on the main stage.
I think before,
Things that were not on my bingo card.
Yeah. I think before she said that about NFTs. So, and granted, I think NFTs are different from AI in that AI has become more ubiquitous than crypto, unfortunately. But I think, there's, she's probably getting paid a boatload of money to say that. And other people are getting paid boatloads of money to say that. And it's like this, they just want the narrative to basically precede the reality, but it's not necessarily the reality right now. So I think that they realize how important the story is to setting the future. There was an interview that maybe you're familiar with Karen Howe, who wrote The Empire of AI. And she did this interview in which she talks about the movie Dune and the prophecy and how they want, they're like, this is a prophecy and this has to become true because it's prophetic. And none of this is a prophecy. Like, they have profit motives and they have egos and they have ideas for what the future of the world should look like that are really divorced from what everybody else wants because they're living in their bunkers or whatever. And so I think that, it's a lot of it is spin, a lot of it is PR, a lot of it is like force feeding us into this narrative and wanting us to believe that this is a foregone conclusion. But we can compete with our own stories and narratives, and there are more of us. So
let me just press a little bit on this because I hear all the critiques that AI is hyped, overhyped. We spent a lot of time on the issue of hype on tech policy press. On the other hand, how many users does ChatGPT have now? Is it something well more than 100 million? Claude, the various other products. These are being adopted en masse, not just in enterprises, not just in government, but by people. Someone told me an anecdote recently about a friend of theirs who had a long commute in a southern town and had gone. He was before a big NPR listener, used to listen to NPR all the way and talk shows, etc. And they said that this person had told them that person said, "I don't listen to NPR anymore. I talk to ChatGPT the entire way to work and home." And I ask it about the news. We talk about issues, etc. And that's a common experience. There are lots of people who are engaging with these things. So I don't know if we want to kind of engage with that a little bit. This is something that is happening, right? And it's something that we need to observe that phenomena and kind of understand to some extent. But Cayden.
Well, I think a lot about this as a media maker for sure. That like the way in which chatbots are sort of supplanting sometimes the algorithmic curation that we're seeing on social media is like there is like it feels like a perfect storm to me sometimes where there's this like so all this AI generated slop on the internet, a lot of which that is like specifically created to outrage and distract. And then the sort of algorithmic curation of our feeds that privileges stuff that we actually engage with, whether it's like clicking the like button, sending it to a friend, writing a comment on it, being like, this is bullshit, this is AI. It's like they're content farming us, right? Like this, again, it like goes back to what are these technologies encourage us to do? I think it's also like worth talking about the fact that like the intersection of sort of generative AI and the infinite scroll, which is another design decision, right? Somebody patented that shit. Like somebody designed the infinite scroll, that like the sort of intersection of these things has made us as like a collective, not just the folks in this room, but like I think the communities that we are trying to organize, increasingly kind of numbed out because they're like, they see the stuff that we're all seeing, but they're not getting the information from organizers who are like, we have an idea about how we solve this, right? And I think that there's some real danger there in terms of that level of alienation. But I also think that because of the backlash against AI, because of all the organizing that folks are doing in communities, both urban and rural across this country against data centers, for instance, that we have an exciting moment to kind of heighten some contradictions around this stuff and really like get people to ask some hard questions about like, how does being online make you feel? What are the sort of like affective aspects of this technology that are like actually making our democracy shittier? But I think that there's also this threat that people are just going to opt out. And, Andre, I'm interested in again, your research on fugitive practices, because I don't think opting out is a reasonable solution to like tech as a whole, right? I think it's reasonable to opt out of specific things and like interact with it in specific and rigorous ways. But just like we can't put globalization back inside the bag, like it's the supply chains are offshore, y'all. It's here to stay. Like we cannot put some of this stuff back in the bag.
Please.
It's as difficult to opt out of the information infrastructure as it is for you to say, I'm gonna get home without taking the street, right? And so many of the options that we have are not actually options at all. I do want to go back a little bit to the question and say that it's not an accident that the ways that AI was deployed to us in 2022 with ChatGPT 3 is not an accident, because it caught us at a moment when we were vulnerable. And so they deployed an agent, a voice that was both sycophantic, it sucked up to you, it made you feel like the questions you were asking were really good questions, as opposed to how I treat my students, like, what? Right. It works really hard to make you feel like it can be a trusted confidant, and it caught us at a weak moment.
That is a fascinating perspective, Andre.
See how that goes? You so right.
It feels
Let me ask you
good.
something else. But also, and I know that there are children, so I'll audit this particular observation. But one of my favorite tweets of all time, and I've been on Twitter for 18 years, is it says, "Work goes to work." Right. And so many of us, we don't like our jobs, but the technology has forced us into an uncomfortable relationship with the computer and everything else. And so, of course, people are using ChatGPT to craft emails, to help them spice up a presentation for a meeting that should have been an email that they didn't want to go to in the first place. Right. And so convenience is one factor that many of us, because we're forced to be more productive. The other factor is that it's simply helping us do, and this is as true for college students as anybody else, do tasks that we are told are important and we don't see the importance in doing them, right? And then there's the last piece, which is the reaction you get when you ask people if they use AI, right? And there's two different kinds of reactions. One is, I would never use AI. And I'm like, maybe you should. Then there's the other one, which is, I use AI for everything. And I'm like, I see why you do, right? So, but then there's this middle ground, and I think that encompasses most of us, right? We are not the adoption people. We're not paying $200 a month for tokens so that we can create videos of Sexy Red kissing Martin Luther King on the dance floor while R. Kelly plays, right? We're not doing that. Sometimes it becomes useful. I look at the transcript that Apple produces when I get a phone call. I just take a minute to read it as opposed to listening to the message, because who picks up the phone anymore, right? Or you have autocorrect working in the background, often to our misfortune. My name gets misspelled on a regular basis, but you would not give up autocorrect because your thumbs are illiterate, right? And so there are many ways in which we are hailed into AI that we don't necessarily consider, again, infrastructure, right? And so talking about resistance is always a fraught thing, because what are you willing to give up to be a part of this newly AI society? Because even when open AI crashes, we're still going to be left with the remains of what AI has done to our healthcare systems, our judicial systems, our politics, our sociality, and everything else. So it's something to think about. Ariella?
Totally. Yeah. No, I am. I think that you have, on the one hand, you have like, I don't know if you saw OpenAI's Sora shut down. But to your point, Andre, people are using ChatGPT and Claude, not just for the reasons that you mentioned, but I interviewed a cognitive psychologist a couple months ago, and her point to me was that people go to AI because they don't feel judged. So they tell AI things that they wouldn't even tell a therapist, because they're like, in addition to it being sycophantic, it's not going to judge me. And obviously, like, we don't know where that data is going. They definitely could be being judged or
That's one way to put it.
yeah. And I also think it's important to, yes, like, I think it's not going away and we have to be aware of it, but I think it's important. I've done a lot of work with whistleblowers in the past, and having people from inside the company share what they can about what the companies are doing. I think that's really, really important for us all to know how the algorithms are working, what how the information is being used. There was a woman I interviewed who quit OpenAI because she said it was becoming more and more like Facebook, Meta, in that they're now starting to advertise. So that information that you're telling ChatGPT as if it's your therapist is actually now being used to advertise to you, which is very scary. And she was like, "That's my red line." And she came out and she told what she could legally and what she knew. So I think that's also really important, is like that we know how behind the scenes they're building these things, so we can engage with them thoughtfully if we choose to.
I saw a headline just the other day that the rates that OpenAI is able to charge for advertising on ChatGPT are actually already going down, which is interesting. But let me, on this question of whistleblowers, just the environment for whistleblowers right now. There's been moves to try to create more whistleblower protections, particularly with this concern in mind, right? This idea that we need whistleblowers, particularly out of tech firms, to step forward. But what are you observing, as a journalist, as someone who talks to people who may be considering whistleblowing? I've talked to many whistleblowers over the years. None of them regret what they've done, but all of them report, long-term, lifelong, in some cases, consequences. What are you observing with regard to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's not an easy thing to do. It's a very lonely thing. You have to, you basically have to jump into the abyss thinking that you may never work in your industry again. And I think a lot of people, whistleblowers, are conflicted because they still want to work. They may want to still build tech, or they're software engineers or hardware engineers, or marketing people even, but they just see something that's so wrong that they can't look away, and they feel this moral obligation to actually do and say something about it. But it's the protections. Technically, in some instances, if you bring information to the government and you break your non-disclosure agreement, you are protected. That information that goes to the government, you're protected, and you're not going to be sued for breaching your NDA. I'm not a lawyer, but that is a somewhat of a protection. But I think that it's still not easy. I don't think there are enough protections for people, and I think that there needs to be a way for people to make money after they whistleblow, because oftentimes, that's the biggest issue for them. Whistleblowing is that they don't know if they'll ever be able to work again. So therefore, the information is kept to them, and I don't have a good answer at this point. It's hard.
Maybe it's something people in this room can help work on to some extent,
Totally.
pushing for those whistleblower protections.
Can I? My favorite example of whistleblowers is people who use their whistles to blow when ice comes. Right? So I want you to think of yourselves, and my friend Alyssa Richardson wrote a book called Witnessing. I can't remember the exact name of it, but her whole thesis of the book was that we have used the smartphone in particular as ways to document misconduct by police and state officials. So all of you can be whistleblowers, but be mindful that, one, the police don't like when they're being observed, so keep your distance, but also that you will also, just like these people who speak out against corporations, you will be targeted and harassed. And so take whatever precautions you can, stand far away, use telephoto, whatever you need to do, right? But please do your best to try to participate in a way of keeping people accountable, because accountability is the watchword of what we're talking about at the moment.
Are there any of the No Tech for Apartheid people in the room? I came to their session yesterday, and one of the slides they showed that they were passing out whistles at a Googlers Against ICE kind of conversation. I thought that was interesting, the idea of the physical whistle being passed out amongst those individuals. I want to move more towards maybe your points of optimism, what we're building instead, where you see opportunity. And Andre, I might start again with you just to go down the line here. But you have focused on building counter worlds and hostile spaces. What are you excited about that you see happening right now? Or what would you encourage folks to have in mind as they go out and build these counter worlds?
One of the biggest threats, I guess, for lack of a better word, is the centralization of the internet. Even though your data isn't portable, if you leave Snapchat, you can't take that data with you to the next destination, right? Many of these sites basically are a central authority monitoring what you say and being able to moderate you in return, right? And so I'm very pleased to learn about things like Mastodon and Discord. My students love Discord. I don't know why, but maybe I'm just old, right? But the capacity to have basically your own group chat in an internet-enabled space where many people can participate, not just by text, but by voice, and on some servers by video, seems to me to be a way to circumvent the centralization and the sharing of information by platforms, still being able to be monitored by ISPs, you know this, right? The other one that I really love is on something that's not centralized, but is marketed as if it is. And so the platform and the protocol is Blue Sky. It runs on the app protocol. The instance I'm talking about is Black Sky, which is run by a brilliant young man named Rudy Frazier. And Rudy is fantastic to me, one, because he does have community organizing roots, but the really interesting part is that he did something that I think we should take a look into as we develop technologies. He built the Black Sky content moderation algorithm and the community by asking what the community itself thought about itself, right? Not depending on external to say what the community is, but asking the community itself what they thought. And so you had to demonstrate, maybe not quite as bad as Black people Twitter, which made people upload a picture of themselves and their forearm next to a piece of paper and the date so they could certify that they were Black, right? But make it clear that you are part of a Black community. And then he added some layers on top of that. So there's a content moderation filter for misogynoir, or violence against women of color, right? There's another one for racism, and you won't find that on Twitter, on LinkedIn, right? They will allow those types of things to happen. If you complain, they may or may not acknowledge your complaint. And in many cases, if you react, they'll moderate you because you exhibited violence. And I'm writing about this now in a way that white call and response, which is what content moderation is designed for the control of voices that are not white, to moderate their volume, to moderate their tone, to keep them from criticizing the status quo, right, in a way that allows the conversation to be civil. So be ratchet, be uncivil, right, in spaces where you can, but also try to take advantage of mechanisms that protect you. I feel like that's my theme for the moment. But yeah, Cayden?
I'll just point out one thing about I noticed recently with Rudy Frazier and the Black Sky Project. They're doing really interesting community engagement around how they use AI for coding, which I think is laudable in the model of being transparent about it and also requesting people's feedback. So for those of you who are thinking about that, how to do that in your organization, I would maybe point you to what Rudy and the team there have done. But Ariella, what about you? How do you want to kind of pick up on this? What are you excited about? Maybe in particular around independent journalism. We're all independent journalists. It's tough out there. It's really, really tough out there. What makes you excited?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many great new media startups, independent journalists in the space. There's like More Perfect Union, which is doing really, really great video journalism, Drop Site News, which is doing really great reporting on Israel. And so I think, and these are a lot of like veteran journalists who are starting their own companies or starting their own Substacks. Substack is not perfect, but it's not perfect, but it's a lot of from like a back very quickly to the whistleblowers, from a whistleblower source perspective. Sometimes it's less intimidating to go to an independent journalist or to go to local news to say, I have this information. And that's where it percolates, and then it can rise up to becoming mainstream. Sometimes it's really daunting to be like, I'm going to go to the New York Times. I've never spoken to a reporter before. And also those people are really inundated. They have different obligations with legal departments that are really, really conservative these days in terms of what they'll publish, because they're, everyone's afraid of being sued for defamation. So for the independent journalists to just be a little bit more bold, to be also video forward, because that's how Gen Z is consuming their news now is through video, and have more contact with everyday people who may have information that the public needs to know about, but they don't know actually how to bring it forward. So I think that there's a lot of just individuals who are just taking to various platforms, and then these small news organizations and local news is so important too, because that's where a lot of the initial information gets out. So there's a lot of good work that's being done, and information and truth like desperately wants a way to get out, and it usually does. Sometimes it takes a while, but yeah, there's a lot of really innovative, investigative journalism and people who are doing great work, and so
Yet it's not getting any easier to get the money to do that work,
that's
right?
true. Yeah, that is true.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, one thing I'll say to the money piece is, so again, I have ADHD, I'm irrepressible, I'm always starting new stuff. But a number of movement accountable media outlets, and Convergence being one of them, last year started an organization called the Movement Media Alliance. And when we talk about movement media, we're talking about media outlets that see themselves as meaningfully accountable to the movements that are pushing progressive, people forward, people powered politics in this country. And one of the things that we did when we started the Movement Media Alliance is we were like, we don't want to be in competition with each other, because there are so many funders out there who do sort of see us as in competition with each other. I'm not competing with Ariel. I'm also not competing with Prism. I'm not competing with Truth Out, right? Like, there are all of these independent, movement accountable media outlets, and like, we were like, what if we fundraised together? What if we did mutual aid and mutual defense together? And like, that stuff is like very hopeful to me, because it's like, we have to participate in capitalism so that we can like pay our rent and shit, but like, we also don't have to participate in highly competitive, cutthroat, I get this story and you don't kind of capitalism, right? We can lift each other up, we can fight for one another. And I think that, like, especially given the political conditions in which we find ourselves, this stuff is desperately, desperately needed. And I guess the other thing I'll say is, like, being a movement accountable outlet, right? So my podcast is called Block and Build. And I think that in a lot of ways, this political framework is probably pretty self-explanatory. It's why we call
and let's be clear, block authoritarianism
Yes.
and build democracy, right?
Well, and specifically, not just build democracy, but build the power of the progressive left to lead in the pro-democracy coalition. Because there's a version of democracy that we could go back to that is, you know, a boring neoliberal democracy that doesn't work for our communities, right? But what would it mean for us, for our movements, to take seriously the task of governing and leading in a world beyond MAGA? That is really the question that we're trying to ask. And to me, I mean, I say this to people, sometimes I tell people what I do and they're like, you must be so sad all the time. And my mental health is not great, but it's not. But I also will say that I am one of the most hopeful people I know, because I spend my days talking to people like the people in this room who are fucking doing something about it. And the work of movement media is, one, to acknowledge that there is no neutral position, right? There's no neutral position under the sun. It is impossible. Objective, quote unquote, objective journalism is bullshit, and we all know it. But also, movement media refuses the easy engagement of outrage, right? That, like, in a lot of ways, again, to go back to the design of the algorithm, this is about engagement farming, and like, violence, like, if it bleeds, it leads has been true for a very long time. And the algorithm has just like accelerated and deepened that. So again, like, thinking about the ways in which our media system allows us to numb out and has our communities numbed out. But movement media is about helping people see themselves inside of the story, right? Helping people see themselves not as objects that corporations or governments act on, but agents of history. Because y'all, we are agents of history. Our movements are agents of history. And I think a lot about our responsibility as journalists and media makers to put people back in the middle of the story for this reason. And I think that, like, it speaks to something deep that we need, that is, to go back to this question of alienation, is about seeing one another and seeing ourselves in the media that we consume and create. And I think that, like, the stuff that I get to cover every single week on Block and Build is fuel for my fight, for sure.
I mean, I think that's how I feel about it too. It's why I kind of do what I do every day, every week. But maybe kind of ask all of you to kind of think a little bit about maybe some of the themes that Cayden's picked up on there. And we heard that message just before we started: fight, fail, fight on. That idea. This is not an easy task. It's not a short-term task. It may not be a task that's complete in our lifetimes. How do you sort of think about that and situate, all of this within that question, within that kind of framing of fight, fail, fight on?
What's the question again?
How do you deal with disappointment?
Pass.
I know you'll come back to it. You'll come back to it.
Ooh.
See?
It's tough.
I mean, I think too, like, as there was a moment where I was working with, like, every single day whistleblowers who were really just, despondent. And I started to absorb some of that. And I was like, I can't continue to help them if I am despondent or tell their stories if I am despondent. And I mean, taking care of oneself in doing this work and kind of like, I don't know. It's
I know, right?
it's, I mean, why?
How do you fix racism?
Well, I want to call into the room one of somebody who I really admire, the organizer and frankly blue sky power user Miriam Kaba, who is always asking us to let this radicalize us as opposed to leading us to despair, right? Like I think one of the things about the way in which sort of hegemonic cultural institutions have always wanted us to think about ourselves and about our movements is that we are powerless. But in truth, I think one of the things that's really scary right now is that we're really fucking powerful. Again, going back to what I was saying at the beginning, that like being in this space with a lot of new faces and a lot of old faces, right? Being like in a space of intergenerational exchange, and not just generation in terms of age, but generation in terms of when we came into the movement, that like, to me, there's something going on right now that like, we're in a moment of heightened contradiction, and there's massive opportunity even in the sort of devastation and despair. And again, to talk about whistleblowing and ICE, like looking at the way in which like networks of everyday people have been called to stand up in places like Minneapolis and North Carolina and Maine and Chicago and LA, that like, there are more of us than there are of them, and there are so many more of us than there are of them. Like, it is like a shocking number of people who agree with us, and I think that the challenge of our movements and of our time is how do we get people out of the algorithmic doom loop and into relationship with one another in ways where we can be rigorous, where we can be caring, and where we can challenge each other in comradely ways. And like, I don't know, I take a lot of heart from this weekend, specifically because of the ways in which the conversations from the stage have not been about building a new orthodoxy around technology. They have been about asking questions, engaging in the practice of critical inquiry, and figuring out ways to talk about it in ways that resonate with our neighbors, our coworkers, the dude who runs the bodega, like whoever, right? Like, and I think to me, it's like talking to your neighbors again is literally what is keeping me going in a lot of ways.
Please.
How nerdy can I get?
Go for it.
This is a safe space. This is a safe space for your nerdiness.
I mentioned writing about Black life earlier, and now I'm trying to wrap my mind around this concept called Black optimism. And I'll be clear that I'm focused on Black life because that's the community that I originate from. But in the work that I've done, I try to be as inclusive as possible. So I'm not Xing you out by saying Blackness. I'm just saying that's where I'm starting from. That's the nerdiest part, right? The thing about Black optimism is it's not a futurism, right? Although there's a future in it, right? And I came across this beautiful TikTok video that I love that I use in my presentation. Is this young man said the most glorious thing in the world is the Black goodbye, right? It's saying goodbye to people who you know may get caught up in some bullshit as soon as they pull out of the driveway, may end up in an accident, may have an aneurysm or a stroke, and yet you tell them, "I'll see you tomorrow. Take care of yourself," right? And he said that's the most beautiful thing because it expresses a desire, a belief to be a continuing part of a world in which you're in relation to one another. So when I talk about Black optimism, I'm not talking about a rose-colored view of what the world will be, that Kamala will be elected in 2028 and Pete Buttigieg will be her vice president. No. By Black optimism, I mean you're assembling the resources that are necessary for you to not just survive, because survival is important, but it's not enough, to thrive, right? And the little things, right? And so the idea that you can work all week and then on Friday night, Saturday, you go to a kickback, Sunday, you may go to church or go to sleep like I do, right? It's the little things you do that will give you the energy to make it through the next day. And they may not be exotic. They may not be fantastical. It's finding all the baubles and rubber bands so your baby can go to school with their hair looking really cute, or, do like I didn't do and shave before you go to work. Clean yourself up a little bit, right? And so these things are super important, even in the context of an information economy, right? There's a phrase that a term that I've come to love. It's called pebbling. Do y'all know pebbling? Right? Basically, it's the things that you maybe not in the group chat, but in your text messages, on phone calls. And I used to do this with my grandmother. I would call her and read her stuff from the newspaper just because I thought it was interesting and I thought she might find it interesting. So pebbling is when you send your memes, your GIFs, your TikTok videos, your sayings, your little pithy colored square with words in it to the people that you care about as a moment, because sharing is an erotic activity. Exactly. It's an erotic activity where you're demonstrating that you want to be affiliated with somebody in relation to them in a moment of care. And doing that little thing on your device, right, is somehow an indicator, a small ritual indicator of care, right? And I urge you to continue doing that, even in the moments, and this definitely helps me because I'm anxious as hell, right? Even in the moments where I feel at my lowest, if somebody sends me something that even makes me chuckle for a second, they've given me another few seconds of joy, another few seconds of life. So stay in relation is all I'm saying, right? Using the information and the devices you have in your hand for those moments when you feel at your lowest, right? And I guarantee if you do it with somebody that will do it to you in return. And that's the way I think we can maneuver the depression and stuff.
I think those may be wise words to end on. I want to thank this panel so much. Let's give them a round of applause.
My thanks to Justin, Andre, and Ariella for being just such great interlocutors, and special thanks this week to our comrades from MediaJustice, especially Iteng Eta, Dee Cerribo, and Steven Renderos, as well as Chris Batista from Mijente. This show is published by Convergence, a magazine for radical insights. I'm Cayden, and our producer is Josh Elstro. Kimmy David designed our cover art, and our summer intern is Trey Nitza. Convergence Magazine is a proud founding member of the Movement Media Alliance. If you liked what you heard, please let us know. Be sure to subscribe for more episodes, tell a friend, and rate and review the show wherever you listen. This helps us find new audiences, and it means a lot to our team. And of course, if you'd like to support the work that we do at Convergence, bring our movements together to strategize, struggle, and win in this crucial historical moment, please join our 2026 membership drive. Go to bit.ly/2026 member drive to set up your membership and get some great perks too. I hope this helps.